Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. D&D is a game that celebrates heroes, but I ask you, what is a hero without a good villain? D&D has got those in spades. Vampires, liches, devils, demons, eldritch horrors, sexy goth elves. D&D has got all your bases covered. But what if I told you that none of these were the true villain of D&D? Yes, dear listener, there is an evil that threatens the life of every campaign and every character we create. And that evil is called being a f***ing adult. I finally am DMing a regular D&D game again, but since all my players are functioning adults and not narcissistic YouTubers like me, sometimes we'll have like 3 weeks between sessions, and let me tell ya, sometimes that sucks more than not playing at all. Now, I find myself faced with two options. I could either be grateful that I have surrounded myself with so many cool people who genuinely want to be part of the game I'm running, and who actively choose to spend time with me and each other while also recognizing that D&D, while one of my favorite things to do with other people, should never come before real-world responsibilities, or I could tie them up in my basement before conducting an unholy blood ritual to seal their souls into their dice, so if they ever stop playing D&D with me, there will be consequences. Tough decision, I know. The story I have for you today stars a DM whose mental state is, well, let's just say the guy is a few sandwiches short of a picnic. This man has developed a complex so severe that if his players aren't willing to sink 8 hours into a D&D session every week, they must be unworthy of joining his cult, I mean, fantasy dice game. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Enjoy. This week's story comes from Reddit user AwareVirus7650 and is titled DM Says We Aren't Dedicated Enough. TLDR. DM tries to use his mental health as an excuse to manipulate players into feeling bad for not being dedicated to the game. So this story is about a year old now, but I do wonder sometimes about it in an AITA way. It's a long story spanning over nearly 3 years, but I'll try to make it as concise as possible. For some context, I joined this D&D group during the lockdown, and I absolutely fell in love with it. We played online nearly every Sunday for about 4 to 5 hours, and I had no idea when I joined, but I found out later that we were actually live streaming the game on Twitch. This becomes important later. Our party consisted of the DM, we'll call him X. Hey, fun fact about me. I got voted most likely to be president back in high school. So when I get elected, my first executive order is gonna be locking any Redditor who abbreviates names with single letters under the jail. I declare from now on that X is gonna be Xavier, and if any more single letter names come up, I'm gonna make it up as I go. Okay, back to the story. Our party consisted of the DM, we'll call him Xavier, and 7 players. The actual details don't matter much to the story. As we started playing when no one had anything to prioritize on the weekends, our schedule was pretty consistent. We had a lot of free time and started spending time together outside of D&D sessions, just sharing interests in other hobbies or staying up super late on Discord just chatting. Through this game, I developed some really close friendships, and most of them are my best friends to this day after playing with them for about 4 years now. It was kind of a golden era, and one of the reasons I actually enjoyed lockdown. The problems started when lockdown was lifted and everyone started to go back to work and see other friends. Xavier, our DM, had been really unhappy working a typical 9 to 5. So he ended up starting his own DMing business and running games for people online. So most of his life was very D&D focused. He never asked us to pay him because we were his friends and at the time were helping him build up his portfolio. I should mention that he also had some pretty bad unresolved mental health issues, which played a big part in why I think it all went downhill. As other priorities take up people's time, we start hanging out less as a group on Discord and talking less in group chats, but we still make time every week for D&D on Sunday. Somehow, Xavier gets it into his head that we aren't dedicated as players, and starts to abandon the sessions midway through or cancel at the last minute to sulk. The first couple of times, because we know about his mental health issues, we reach out to see if he's okay. He almost never responds, but eventually comes back and messages the group chat like nothing really happened. So we just assume that it's fine. The campaign continues for another year and a half. More and more often, Xavier starts to have more private conversations with me about how other players aren't as dedicated as he would like. Okay, let's start off by addressing the dedication of Xavier's players, shall we? Being a DM is hard, and very rarely do you feel like players appreciate all the work that goes on behind the scenes. It can kind of feel discouraging if your perception dictates that your players don't see your game as a priority after you've spent so much time preparing stuff specifically for them. But I want all of the fledgling DMs to listen in real close to what I am about to say. Your game is not a priority, nor should it be. D&D is not a job, D&D is not school, D&D is not a romantic relationship, and D&D sure as should not be treated like it's your child. It is a fantasy dice rolling game that you use as an excuse to hang out with your friends and maybe even make some new ones. This is a lesson that I had to learn the hard way, that your players' presence alone, in spite of their adult responsibilities, is a pretty good indication of their investment in your game. This right here, this reads as a ploy for attention and sympathy to me. Now, we don't know what specific mental health struggles Xavier is dealing with, but basic psychology dictates that rewarded behavior is repeated behavior. It's the same reason why degenerate morons become famous, despite everyone unanimously agreeing that they shouldn't. We keep throwing money at degenerate morons, so the fat cats keep throwing contracts at degenerate morons. With that in mind, imagine what happens when you all shower Xavier with, "Aw, poor buddy," every time he metaphorically flips the table on you. His brain is getting a shot of that dopamine and learning about how table flipping is a one-way ticket to validation and comfort, which is not your responsibility, by the way. Mind-blowing fact, but the kid who always threatens to pack up all his toys and go home rarely wants to actually pack up his and go home. My attitude towards this kind of thing comes from a lifetime of trying to cater to people like this, and even trying to pull it off as a younger and more terrible version of myself. So let me tell you, my patience for this sort of thing is drier than a nun crawling through the Sahara. Of course, I am not saying that supporting your friends is a bad thing. I mean, if you aren't there to lend a hand for a friend when they're at their lowest, then what good are you? But what I am saying is that there is a massive and measurable difference between supporting and enabling. And I'll give you 3 guesses what I think this sounds like. But hey, at least our OP isn't gonna do anything stupid like volunteer to be this guy's live-in therapist or anything. In 2022, I moved to London and due to expenses, moved in with Xavier and his girlfriend, where I became kind of like his therapist. Whenever he would walk out on a game, I would go to his room and ask if he was alright, and to try to convince him to maybe come back, or at least try to explain what was causing him so much stress. He's a pretty closed book though, so there's not much I can say to help him. Time goes on, and sometimes people are late, obviously annoying. But looking back, it was only by a maximum of 15 minutes. And to compensate, Xavier would add on an hour or 2 onto our sessions. As time went on, the sessions got longer and longer. Sometimes we started playing at 1 p.m. and wouldn't finish until 9 p.m., which most of us didn't mind. But we started getting a couple of complaints from the group's partners asking why half the weekend was spent on D&D. As people started taking on more work and other commitments, people sometimes missed out on sessions, making Xavier even more anxious. Eventually, I found out what the issue was. He said that he really wanted to make something of the Twitch channel, but if people weren't dedicated to it, it wouldn't happen. He was obsessed with Critical Role, and I think he might have hoped that we would gain a similar sort of popularity. Due to his business picking up more traction, he mentioned that he felt like he was being taken advantage of by our group, because we were neither committed nor were paying him. When he said this, he exempted me and a couple of other really dedicated people, but again, looking back, he probably just wanted to keep me on his side. We had a group discussion about what we wanted from Twitch. Most of the group said they were happy to contribute. I asked for the password to the Instagram account so I could post and promote consistently. I never got given it in the end. But 2 of the players vocalized that they really didn't care all that much about streaming, and they were happy to come along for the ride, but they just wanted to play D&D. This is where things start to take a turn for the worse. It's obvious that Xavier isn't happy with the 2 undedicated players, and it doesn't help that these 2 players are the ones who most often are late to the game. More and more, I'm in Xavier's room trying to be encouraging. He opens up about some of his mental health issues, and I tell him that he should try to find actual therapy or something that will help him. I appreciate that therapy isn't for everyone, but Xavier had never even tried. Also bear in mind that while Xavier is saying these things to me, he never actually addresses it with the group or the individuals that he's annoyed at. I asked him once if he wanted me to speak to the group, and he gave a half-assed, "Oh, thank you. I would appreciate that, but you know you don't have to, though." I went back to the Discord call and basically recounted what Xavier had said to me about real commitment, and about Xavier not being paid for his time. Thankfully, another player called me out on it and reminded me that D&D was not school or work, but something that we did for fun. We all loved the game, and it was pretty evident. We were friends, and we didn't have to be in this group, but we wanted to because we enjoyed each other's company. I apologized and asked Xavier to join the call. And Xavier didn't say a word about his actual feelings and didn't apologize for penalizing the group. I felt quite manipulated and betrayed at this, seeing how I simply repeated his words. But the conversation seemed to be taking a brighter turn, so I didn't want to be the one to bring the mood down again. The group, again, encourages Xavier to seek help, because no matter what we say or how much we love on the game, if Xavier doesn't believe it, we can't help it. After the call, he thanked me for sticking up for him. But I just felt awful about it. I had berated my best friends and taken the fall for something I didn't even really think. I couldn't even call it out because Xavier had said that I didn't have to. And that's what happens when you volunteer to be someone's therapist. There's a reason why therapists do everything in their power to remove themselves as far away from the lives of their clients as possible. And also there's the teeny tiny little detail of having a doctorate in clinical psychology and being certified by the state thing. But you know, details. Okay, let's go ahead and recap here, shall we? This guy expects every member of this D&D group, 8 people by the way, to spend half of their entire weekend just playing D&D every week for 3 years without missing a single session, while also paying him, despite him collecting free advertising for his side hustle on a weekly Twitch stream that he never told you about, by the way, and he somehow convinced you that the party were the ones not doing enough. ROP swallowed the bait, the line, the rod, and the boat. Like, honestly, even for a second, how did she even begin to believe that even half of what Xavier is demanding was reasonable? Well, it's no wonder you felt betrayed and manipulated, OP. Maybe it's because you were betrayed and manipulated, but I'm no expert. I do want to say that I think our OP does take some blame here, considering how she's the one who decided to set up this confrontation and volunteered herself to fill in as Xavier's improv therapist. If a gazelle lathered itself up with a honey glaze, stuffed an apple in its mouth, and then had itself hogtied on a plate outside of a lion's den, could you really blame the cat for taking a bite? What we have here is someone so blinded by their empathy that they never even considered that the person they're white knighting for may actually have been the problem the whole time. It's not a bad thing to want to help those who are suffering, that just makes you human. But it's that innate level of empathy that human beings have that people like Xavier prey upon. Look at how easy he was able to influence you into becoming not only complacent towards, but actively championing his insane demands. Like I said earlier, I have very little patience for people who use their poor mental health as an excuse to act like a dickhead towards other people. Sorry I got drunk at your wedding and threw up on your cake. I have autism. Sorry I backed over your dog with my Honda, I have ADHD. Sorry I gifted you 37 stab wounds, I have halitosis. F off. And what did our OP receive in return for their noble service? Nothing. utter abandonment. Xavier gladly would have thrown her to the wolves the second there was any indication of pushback towards his batshit insane demands. And that little "thanks for standing up for me" line is just the f***ing cherry on top. Oh, thank you for saving me from those big old undedicated meanies. They don't take my work as a DM nearly as seriously as you do. He knows that he totally left you out there to be the bad guy. So now he's actively trying to re-secure his victimhood in your brain to maintain control. Time will tell if this strategy keeps working on our OP. If they were smart, they'd tell Xavier to tone down his psychotic expectations before he secures these hands. In the game, we were reaching what we thought was the BBEG boss battle. It had been hyped up for ages, with Xavier telling us how hard this fight would be and that some of us could die. Recurring characters came back to help us fight, and we all mentioned the session before the final battle that this was the end of the campaign. How sad we all were to see it end, but how proud we were of how far we had come. Xavier didn't respond. Something else that's important to note here is that Xavier had previously said that beyond this fight, he expected the game to go on for another 3 months or so, just to tie up loose ends. I should also mention that he had encouraged us to create new characters for a new campaign. In the week between the final campfire chats and the boss battle, Xavier's girlfriend asked him again how long he expected the current campaign to go on for, and he said possibly another 6 months to a year. We were all confused, but then we got to the final battle. After we defeated the Elder Brain, our big bad evil guy, it was revealed that there was an even bigger big bad evil guy that was controlling it. This was pre-Baldur's Gate 3, just a funny coincidence. Our group was surprised, but none of us wanted to question it in case Xavier thought we were being unappreciative again. Once the dust had cleared, Xavier decides that he wants to focus on one character specifically, as the player, we'll call him Frank, is the only one who hasn't had any backstory exploration in the whole game. He made a character curse to never be able to talk about his past, and from a very distant location, so it was never really relevant to the story. I created a new character as my old one was busy doing her own thing. Our characters took a year-long break, but I ended up regretting it. Again, I was living with Xavier and didn't want him to think I was being unappreciative. So we go to this new location, and now that the big bad evil guy is dead, the story has no direction. Everything is focused on Frank's character. He's the only one that speaks the native language, and the rest of us are just kinda there. It takes us 6 sessions to get there, meet Frank's family, and then start the journey to the capital. Now that the games are 8 hours long, that's 48 total hours, maybe more, of me sat at my computer doing literally nothing. I started playing video games, because sometimes I didn't say a word the whole session. Basically, it got really boring. Other than Frank, we had no reason to be there, but we all felt bad that Frank hadn't gotten his character appreciation, and Xavier was still pulling his old dedication trick. I spoke to some other players, and they agreed that things had fallen off a bit, and me and another girl in the group decided that we needed a break from it. We'd been playing for 2.5 years, and we just wanted something a bit different. So we told Xavier that we were gonna stop playing this game and join back when the new one started. Xavier was not happy at all. We tried to be kind, knowing how fragile Xavier was about the game. But yeah, he stopped talking to me for like a week, which is a long time if you live together. The Sunday after me and this other girl stopped playing, Xavier didn't show up and never ran a session for the group again. He didn't tell anyone that the campaign was stopping. Others waited on Discord for him to arrive, but after 3 weeks of wondering, people stopped showing up. So the game fizzled. We were still friends though, and I decided that I was going to stay out of it for my own sanity. Xavier did mention to me a while later that the other girl had taken advantage of him, because he gave her a cool story arc and she just dropped the game out of nowhere. Majorly awkward because I knew he was likely saying the same thing about me to other people. We did suggest starting campaign 2 and coming back to campaign 1 after we had all had a break, but Xavier didn't want to do that. A couple of other people mentioned DMing instead, but every time Xavier said that he would start up campaign 1 again soon, so don't bother. It never happened. In the end, summer of 2023, Xavier and his girlfriend had a huge argument. His girlfriend told us that he'd done some pretty questionable things bordering on abusive towards her, and asked him to leave and to stay with his mom for a while. Xavier left our D&D group chat, ignored everyone who reached out, and then blamed us for, again, not being dedicated enough. It was a whole thing, but too long to go into. He blamed all his actions on his poor mental health. To which the general response was that we tried to help him as much as we could, but it's still no excuse for how he treated people. Ironically, I'm the DM of the group now, and we've started a fresh campaign. Xavier isn't in contact with anyone from our group apart from one. Weirdly enough, one of the guys who was always late. I do feel a bit of sympathy for Xavier, understanding the DM anxiety of wanting to make sure your players have a good time. But I try not to let it get in the way of things. We don't stream on Twitch, we play in person and schedule games when we can. It's honestly shocking to see the difference in the vibe we have now. People have openly said how much more relaxed they feel, and I don't think it's anything to do with my DMing skills. I'm still very new, but simply the fact that we are not locked into some D&D cult. End of story. Could you imagine the mental state of someone who is able to stay dedicated to a game that makes you sit there and not participate for 8 hours? Let's go ahead and really let that sink in. 48 hours. 2 whole days, including the time you would have spent sleeping, was spent sitting still and staring at a computer screen doing nothing. And if you dare say, maybe I don't want to spend another year of my life doing this, then congratulations! You are now the sole cause of Xavier's mental turmoil, and you are bad and should feel bad. Add in the fact that your 8 hours of nothing is being streamed on Twitch. Imagine thinking that showcasing 48 hours of all but one player sitting in silence is a good way to advertise your paid DM services. Like, how sad is your life if you watch this stream and go, oh boy, I can't wait to drop actual money to have this guy ignore me for 8 hours at a time. Joyous day! And not only is this guy forcing you to be bored, but he's also completely adamant against someone else taking the reins and guiding you all towards, I don't know, some fun. Hey, we should start up another campaign. No, I'm not done cooking. Homie, your cooking has been in the oven for so long that shit is burnt. And now the guy is actively and maliciously trying to demonize the previously dedicated players to the rest of the friend group. You can color me surprised that this guy turned out to be an abusive piece of garbage. Your mental health issues are never an excuse for actively making someone else's life worse. I get that DM anxiety stems from wanting your players to have fun, but if Xavier wanted his players to enjoy themselves, he wouldn't have done anything that happened in this story. You could have come straight from having a grippy sock vacation, and I'd still tell you to shove it if you tried turning D&D time into something you might find in Guantanamo Bay. I'm happy to see that our OP escaped this nightmare, and I hope that they have a long and fruitful DM career ahead of them. Just think of all the cool stuff they can do with their time now, like making me fan art. That's right, how about we take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art comes from viewer Tortoise Not Turtle, who depicts the latest and greatest in military hardware. Solar-powered, armed to the teeth, and equipped with a 420 terabyte cringe collection database. And this Mecha Drake is the most formidable weapon ever created. Now, if only it didn't cost $55 billion. Yeah, I'm gonna need to upload a few more videos to pay for this.
My wizard, what is it you have to show me?
Behold, my lord, the answer to slaying the cringe-hoarding dragon of the north. I give you... Mecha Drake!
Oh, we're doing the Mecha Godzilla thing. Okay, what does it do?
It commits tax fraud, but faster.
Taxation is theft.
So, what do you think?
You're fired.
Thank you again, Tortoise Not Turtle, for submitting your art. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and send in your fan art. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.